You've come to be known and well respected for your work with transcendental argumentation, which is probably kind of the biggest supporting idea to Van Tillian presuppositionalism. Could you kind of give us a kind of a skyscraper elevator pitch for TAG and why it's such an important concept of presuppositionalists, or really of any apologists could use?
Yeah, so presuppositionalism as an apologetic methodology is often associated with this idea of a transcendental argument. And it was Cornelius Van Til, who's often seen as a pioneer of presuppositionalism, who really focused attention on the idea of arguing for God in a transcendental way. The distinctive insight of the transcendental argument is that the existence of God, and Van Til would maintain not just any God, but specifically the God revealed in Scripture, the existence of the biblical God is a presupposition of all rational thought and experience. In other words, Van Til used the analogy of a house and the foundations of a house. And I know you're familiar with it, but maybe not all your listeners are. But Van Til argued that any house needs to have some sort of foundations that are holding it up. There needs to be something there. There has to be something that exists to serve as the foundation to hold up the house. And he argued, and this was the idea of the transcendental argument, that the house of human knowledge has foundations. And those foundations are narrowly the existence of God, but more broadly, the truth of the Christian worldview. That is what Christianity teaches about God, about creation, about the nature of human beings and our place within the creation, and various other aspects of the Christian faith. Such that if Christian theism were not true, then knowledge would be impossible. We wouldn't be able to know anything. We wouldn't be able to have rational thought. We wouldn't be able to formulate coherent ideas, make propositional truth claims. So the house of human knowledge rests upon the existence of the God of the Bible. That's the core idea. Now, turning that into an argument requires a bit more work. And Van Til, I think, sketched out a number of ways that you could make that argument. And what I've said in a few places is that although we speak about the transcendental argument, or TAG, actually TAG is more like a family of arguments or an argumentative project in which there are different ways of teasing out the fact that human knowledge and rationality rests upon the existence of God, or presupposes the existence of God. There are actually a number of different ways of making the argument, and I've tried to develop some of those ways in my writings, but actually there's a lot of scope. And if you look at how presuppositionalists have made the argument, if you look at someone like John Frame, for example, or Greg Barnson, they've each got their own distinctive formulations of the argument, or their way of arguing transcendentally for God. But I think what's distinctive about TAG, as opposed to more what we might call more traditional theistic arguments, is that traditional theistic arguments start by assuming something else that we know and trying to infer or deduce God's existence from that. As Van Til puts it, they start at one place in reality and try to lead you to another place in reality. So, for example, the cosmological argument starts with the sheer existence of the universe, or the existence of any contingent being, and seeks to infer or deduce from that the existence of God as a necessary being, a necessary first cause. And generally speaking, that's what most theistic arguments do. But what the transcendental argument tries to do is go deeper and say, what is necessary for us to have any knowledge at all? Rather than simply, well, we know this, so based on that, we can also know this about the existence of God or the attributes of God. The transcendental argument, we might say, is digging even deeper and asking what must be true, what must be the case for us to know anything at all, for knowledge to even be possible in the first place.
Yeah, so it's almost like the transcendental argument forces, let's say, the unbeliever to kind of, it doesn't allow them to cheat, right? In other words, it doesn't allow them to start with something in order to get somewhere. And right, am I hearing that right?
Yeah. Yeah, because of course, if you're engaged in a discussion or a debate with an unbeliever, you want to reason. You want to be a rational person. You want to seek the truth. You want to employ rational methods, to employ reason responsibly in order to establish what the truth is. But that reason itself isn't a free lunch. You know, they say there's no such thing as a free lunch, and reason itself isn't autonomous and independent. In other words, it's not the sort of thing that you can just appeal to in a worldview neutral or worldview independent way. So what Van Til's argument is saying, in effect, is that reason isn't a neutral, a freebie that anyone with any worldview can just appeal to as a neutral authority, but rather reason itself requires some account, some worldview to account for why there is this thing reason and why we are able to use it to evaluate truth claims and determine what the truth is. So again, some methods in apologetics tend to simply take reason for granted and say, look, we all know what reason is. We all respect reason. So let's just start with reason and apply reason and see where it leads us. There's nothing wrong with that in principle. But what the transcendental argument is doing is saying, well, hold on a minute. Why can we assume this thing reason in the first place? Why can we just take this reason for granted? Isn't it actually the case that certain things must be true, that the world must be a certain way, that reality must be a certain way in order for there to be this thing reason? And of course, we need to talk more about what we mean when we talk about reason. Mm-hmm. But reason itself requires deeper foundations to go beyond human reason alone.
Yeah. So would you, the transcendental argument, would you say, gives a metaphysical basis for why we can have epistemological, knowledge or whatever?
Yeah, that's exactly right. What it's trying to do is to find or to expose the metaphysical preconditions of our epistemological assumptions. Okay, so if everyone assumes a certain epistemology, of course, some people think very, carefully about their epistemology. They're self-conscious about their epistemology. Other people, it's more in the background. They just have assumptions about what knowledge is, how we know things, how we evaluate truth claims. But what a transcendental argument tries to do, at least I think the way the Van Til conceived of it, at any rate, is to ask what are the metaphysical preconditions or the metaphysical foundations of our epistemological assumptions.
So which and there's various approaches, because we noticed that in your book. You talk about morality, you talk about values, you talk about reason. Which one you think? Which one do you like best, or which one do you think is most effective?
Yeah, and it's good that you distinguish those two questions, because there's the arguments that I like the most, but then there are the arguments that I think tend to be more effective in practice. So I'll start with the like. I am very fond of what I call the argument from logic, and I've written on this. It's really sort of captured my imagination and my ambitions to try and spell it out in a rigorous way. And the argument from logic is the argument that if there are laws of logic, and if the laws of logic are really as we understand them to be or assume them to be, then God must exist to be the metaphysical foundation of those laws of logic. And there's a lot of steps you need to fill in, of course, to get to that conclusion. But I've written on that. I think it's an intriguing argument. I think it's powerful. I think it can be worked out in a pretty rigorous way that even philosophers who aren't Christians can respect and want to grapple with it. But
that's the paper that I did all the highlighting on. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. So that was a paper. I can't even remember when it when it came out. Was it 2011, 12? I lose track. But that was actually co-authored with a colleague and a good friend of mine, Greg Welty, who his own research actually has really done all the heavy lifting in that argument, because his doctoral thesis was a defense of theistic conceptual realism. That is the idea that abstract objects such as propositions and possible worlds are best understood as divine concepts or divine ideas. It's a very Augustinian theory, but Greg has worked it out with a lot of analytical rigor. And sort of lying behind the argument from logic is a broader argument about abstract objects and how God is a necessary foundation for abstract objects. But that argument isn't everyone's cup of tea, because it requires talking about some somewhat technical metaphysical concepts, and if you have some familiarity with analytic philosophy, you can get up to speed with it pretty quickly. But I found that even very smart people who just aren't familiar with the metaphysical terminology and the literature on abstract objects and ways in which philosophers distinguish between different kinds of abstract objects and the terminology, they can either very quickly get lost or frustrated or dismissive of the argument. They think it's sort of some sort of philosophical cup and ball trick, and they don't take it seriously. And so, although I think it is a very serious argument, and there are non-Christian philosophers who take it very seriously, it's not one that I reach for immediately in an average apologetic conversation, because it requires quite a bit of explanation and defense just to get people to even understand what the argument is, never mind evaluate it.